Nicodemus here. Today's topic, anxiety. What are some ways to manage that? Make it more of an easy and effortless thing that we can manage.
How do we deal with anxiety and manage anxiety is the question. First, the understanding that so many people are living in an anxious state, it's really interesting if you think of the evolution of human beings, this fight or flight response that we have in the brain and how that's protected us for thousands and thousands of years. And people are still living like that now, right? You have this physiological experience in the body. And a lot of people think that that's just the way life is, And if you look at like the evolution of human beings, it's just the way human beings have been. Well, I'd like to pose a question for us is, what does it take to transcend that in this human form? And is that even possible that we're able to live in a place of peace, without free of anxiety? Now, I want to say this, there's a big conversation in that people, as you get older, first off, we all went through it to get to where we are. So we all created an image and a way of a survival strategy, if you will, to survive in this world. So for all of us growing up, everybody's had things that have hurt them, hurt their heart, things that have betrayals and fears, all of this. That's part of the human experience. The question becomes now is it possible to transcend all of that from the past? And, I think Course in Miracles says it probably the most brilliant for me, that really all fear is ultimately reducible to the basic misperception that we have the ability to usurp the power of God. I said that in an earlier podcast. So really what we're doing when we're afraid is we're trying to be general manager of our life and of the universe. We're trying to control and defend against future pain because we have past evidence of pain. See, that's what happens for human beings. So let's make a distinction here is that if let's say you're out at night and some people are chasing after you, of course you're going to get the fight or flight response kick in and you run. Or if you're out in nature and a bear is showing, like, of course, for myself included, you get on the edge of, let's say, a mountain or something, you look over, anyone's going to have that normal reaction in the body. But what we're talking about is this psychological fear that is afraid of an unknown future, like it poses a threat against us that we have to make appropriate defenses against. Because basically what the Course says, A Course in Miracles says, is that it's almost like we're set out to make provisions for ourselves because we don't think provisions will be made for us. And that's what it really comes down to. If you know provisions are going to be made for you, because you know the universe, life, God ultimately has your back, has you. Like you're being lived by this force that's beyond your finite, limited, I can only see this moment. I have no idea what the next moment's going to be. I have images of my past. For most people, they're pains and hurts. So what people are doing is they're taking their past and then they're anticipating and trying to avoid future pain. That's where the anxiety comes from. So the Course says it's reducible to the basic misperception that you have the ability to usurp the power of God. Really what the Course says, I want you to just think about this for a moment, is that actually the fear comes from this idea that you think you created yourself. So just hear me out for a moment. I know you might be like, what the heck does that mean? See, if you understood that God created you as an eternal being, a soul, the spirit, the I am, you'd realize fear wouldn't be possible, because what fear comes from is this finite picture of yourself, your body, your personality, all the images that you have of yourself. That's a finite wall. Think of yourself almost like a box. It's really like a prison cell. All of our views of ourselves as a limited, finite body, because of course we would be afraid, because ultimately what we're afraid of is the death of, the abolishing of this picture of myself that I created. That's why in India, they used to say all fear is really what's called avinavesh. All fear is really a fear of death in the end, because we're afraid of the image of ourselves being threatened or dying. So think about this when you get anxious. Now, I could tell you this, just you hearing it, you're going to have to practice this ultimately. This is the practice for all of us. Because every time you have anxiety or fear of the future, or even that like hum of anxiety in maybe in your heart or your stomach, where it's just like you don't even know what you're anxious about. What that is there is, and it could be deep of just from our past, deep in the recesses of our mind, where we have thoughts of who am I? Like I'm going to die someday. And everything that I see, everyone deep in their heart knows everything they see in their life is going to say goodbye at some point, the form of it. So of course, human beings walk around with this existential angst, which is really constant, the constant threat against their idea about themselves. Now, what A Course in Miracles would say is that deep down, what that really is just the form or the creation of the belief in separation from God. It's actually not even a creation, because it's just made up in our mind. It's this like hallucination where we dream we're separate from God. That's where all anxiety and fear really comes from. So when I said this idea that we created ourselves, we think that we created ourselves, and that it's just me. Most people walk around actually like they're the center of all of their dream, their life, and they forget that they were created by eternity, by God. And that's where all fear ultimately comes down to, is this idea that somehow we can kick God off the throne and put ourselves on. See, if I say I place the future in the hands of God, that means if I have anxiety, I don't believe that in that moment. So that thought is in need of correction now, because I can't be, I place the future in the hands of God. You created me, whatever your will, it's like in thy will be done, not my will, but thy will. If I'm surrendered to that, actually you're going to realize that you're being led, that miracles in life, that nothing can threaten you, nothing can add to you, nothing can take away from you. As a being, you were already created whole, perfect, complete, and eternal. So fear is actually not possible in that perspective. Now, I understand as I tell you this, some of you might go like, wait, what? I'm only speaking to you from my own personal experience too, because why I sought these things out was a way out of fear and suffering. Because everybody let's say everybody at some point, it's like we all have that voice in us. If you're listening to this, there's a good likelihood that you're probably tired of suffering. Why would you spend 10 minutes of your life listening to something like this unless you're looking for ways out of suffering? And the way out of suffering is to understand what we truly are at our core. That is this pure I am present. You were born, when I say born, I'm going to put in born, created as an eternal being. And this is beyond the scope of what we can understand. So for us, the practical is an every day continually learning to surrender to God, spirit, that we're being led, that actually everything works together for good. All things are lessons God would have me learn. So even if I forget, it's like I have the inner teacher to always remind me. And there's always a miracle and opportunity to shift from fear, anxiety into abundance, into wholeness, into love, into peace. And that's actually the point of our life in this experience. Because as you do that more and more, you start to experience what the Course would call the holy instant. That in this moment, there really is no fear possible. Fear comes from thinking, projection from the past, projecting into the future, and that avoiding of pain. When we stop doing that, we see in this moment, you're whole, you're perfect, you're complete, you're eternal. And we're playing a game right now where we seem finite. Actually, the beauty of this game is to prove to ourselves over and over again that we are eternal beings. That's why the Course says the correct use of time is to be used solely as a means for regaining eternity. So when you start to see that and you start to live your life from that perspective, you start to realize fear is impossible if we truly understand that in our hearts. And that's what actually the correction of our thoughts and all of the thoughts of fear, that's why that correction is needed. And then you start to realize that you've already been given everything and that nothing can affect you except your thoughts. So let's correct those thoughts that try to convince us of separation, of fear, of anxiety, and put ourselves back into the original position created by God, and reflecting that eternal nature and using this as an opportunity to love and to practice forgiveness and to heal any thoughts of fear and any thoughts of separation.